Hey, how's it going, guys? I'm not really good at intros, so I just kind of want to go ahead and get into it. Talking about kind of like the fall and end of Los Ratones. I've been following them for a bit, so I just kind of wanted to like give my own thoughts and opinions if anyone ever thought about caring. So I've been following them for a while, and at the start I was a bit of a fan, and then they grabbed the massive ego, and I was kind of like, okay, starting to hate them a little bit. And then LR fans made me really hate them because they were just trying to like hate on everybody else that isn't them. And the first thing that I want to give credit to is Kadril. He's been doing an amazing job, especially with the PR and everything, especially with the end of the turnout of how the last two games not by Lost Ratones. If you know which games I'm talking about, you know which games I'm talking about. And a lot of people had some like different ideas and things to say, and I'm happy that he said it the way that he did. The reason I'm making this video is kind of like to talk about what I think was the leading cause for enough of the Lost Ratones losses to accumulate for them to not go to the next stage, right? So like what were kind of like their issues, their difficulties, their downfall, and what can we really like look into to pick out and be like, okay, yeah, I mean, if we could have seen these kinds of things, if we could have worked on these kinds of things, obviously we didn't have access to the scrims until now, so there's a lot that's still left to be discussed. But I think that a lot of the conclusions, they came up by themselves, right? So like, Baus, for example, he's been talking about it having like certain different games where he feels like if he plays Cassante or any other top laner like that, all of these matchups he had to deal with for other pros who have had to lane and verse the Cassante over 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 games, right? So whichever champion they would pick into it, they would just be much more familiar and just be on autopilot when they do the game. And as a player who is not so much a one trick anymore and kind of queues in fill queue and masters elo and just plays whatever, the difference between playing your 1 to 3 to 5 champions to switching roles, playing different stuff, or playing something that's a bit new, and especially in a pro setting where you see that there is like a difference of like thousands of games in the familiarity of a certain matchup, you come to the realization and conclusion that even if the pro player is not so good with a certain champion, they're just so knowledgeable of the matchup that it doesn't matter, and it leads to those little def games where people scale and they just know how to utilize the endgame a bit better. So starting off with Baus, right? I think a clear solution that we kind of saw is being able to just like pick his own specialty champs, pick the champions that he's a little bit more clean on. Obviously, the Sion was permabanned, and I mean, it's hard to like do something else about it. And the one game where it was allowed was a team that knew exactly what they were going into, exactly what they were baiting, exactly what the draft is going to be. And despite all of that, and despite Baus dying many, many times on that Sion game, he drew so much pressure and so much effort to get so many dragons that the game was still a 50-50 in my opinion. Before I continue going, I did also want to discuss the fact and element of RNG. The very last game that Lost Ratones lost, I think, was not in the face of the draft. I don't think it was their team versus the enemy team or anything like that. And I think it's important to remember, even when like T1 was in their prime, and even when you look at Faker statistics, is that he still loses one every 3 games, right? At some point he had 666 wins, 333 losses, right? 66.6 repeating win rate kind of like goes to show that like even when you're at the highest level in these cases, there's always going to be these little accidents, little misfortunes, a day where somebody isn't in exactly their right mind or isn't ready to play at their highest of elo, right? and sometimes you don't check the map, and sometimes you don't notice a thing, and these things just kind of build up, happen. Some unknowns are always bound to happen in a game of League, and it ended up the way it is. Moving up to Velja. I saw a lot from his games where there were a lot of like random invades. Now, there is an example of a Caitlyn Karma lane, right? Where if they want to go and push up into the bot lane level 1 and try to set up any type of pressure in the frontal bush so that Caitlyn can start the game with a sneaky Q, get that like 100 and something damage, Karma Mantra Q, whatever. Awesome, right? And then enemy bot has to go contest that, make sure that they aren't doing any of that type of cheesing, which lets him go in as Mundo or as Pantheon through the bot side and go for an invade and play vertical jungle, right? That's more than okay. I completely understand when something like that happens, but there were several cases, and I want to give like just in the LEC that they were playing, 3 to 4 cases. Again, I'm not going to show any footage or anything here, where we can clearly see Velia just kind of doing a random invade, something that's very forced, something where he might have felt like he needed to do too much, especially at the start where their games were a bit weaker. You can feel whether it's overconfidence or being overzealous, kind of trying to go for things that are a bit too much. And I think the perfect like coach or somebody that looks at it, that like has an in-depth, if you guys want to spend some hours and look at footage, is I Will Dominate, right? He did VODs of their games and kind of showing what they did good, what they did bad, talking about the drafts. And it's pretty clear to see that... sorry, I'm going to stop this now. It's pretty clear to see that there's a bit of an issue with how aggressive he is and how much he's trying to like win the game, when there's the issue at hand of like, this is a different level, this is not solo queue. And overall, I just think there were a few missed spots with him. With Nemesis moving down to the mid lane, from the games that I've seen, and you know, I don't remember Nemesis playing any champions like Galio, I don't think, but there were a lot less roaming opportunities, a lot less lane impact. And while he does very good in lane, while he outperforms more than half of the cast, at the very least, during the late game, I feel like Nemesis, and it's not bad for the team. I just think that not putting as much pressure somewhere in the bot or top lane with certain roams where you see the enemy mid laner doing a little bit more has kind of led to a tiny bit of a downfall, right? I'm not saying, I would say that Nemesis is probably like a 56% win rate player, and that little factor might have made it 55 or 54%. Still very good player, and obviously I'm not saying that it's a whole percent win rate of a difference, but in the games that I've seen, a lot less impact than some of the mid laners, the prominent mid laners that come up to my head. Crowny's next. He kind of had to be forced to early pick a lot of his games. Kind of hard for him to pick ADCs that just like completely stomp and overrule and outdo everyone else. So whether it's Corki or Caitlyn, that kind of stuff takes a while to scale, which makes it a bit harder to just outright carry. And on top of that, he had issues with Reckless, I would say, where Reckless's champion pool didn't enable him as much to go and play for super winning hard, like scrappy comps, right? I would have loved to see Velia with some like Nidalee or Lee Sin or anything a bit more aggressive, and having Reckless on a more engaging support, maybe more Bard games. Obviously, he had games playing like Braum, and I'm not sure if he played Nautilus, but I remember Reckless being able to play a very good Nautilus. But You don't see a lot of Rel from him. You don't see a lot of Alistar. He's the type of player that would like to play Nami into a Karma lane and kind of play the Enchanter matchup and play it much better and kind of scale with time. And no, he knows exactly where he needs to position when he plays an Enchanter. And when he plays Braum, he's a very good defensor. But again, kind of going over everything, for Reckless, it's just not having as many engaged supports. Crownie is kind of forced to early pick a bit too much. Nim is kind of like not roaming a little bit too much. Velia is just a bit too aggressive when they have comps, right? Where they're built for each other and make it so that he needs to be a bit more reserved than he played at the start of the season. And I think their practice and their scrims and like you can see halfway into the season, like or not into the LEC games where like they just became so much better as soon as the coordination came together. Their record was about 5-1 at the very end, right? And for Baus, lastly, it was just like the champion pool, right? Kind of not being able to pick these prominent top laners like Aatrox, Cassante, etc. And at the same time, Rumble, for example, not being able to pick up any of those, and at the same time, kind of having that issue of when he does pick those champs, um, he just kind of gets into the situation where he doesn't have the experience to really take over the game, right? And he was in positions where he could have done it here, he could have done it there. Very like hard, very like small frames. Again, I'm not saying I'm a better player than any of these five players. By far, they're all better than me. But when you look at the replay, when you look at the VOD, you can always tell when mistakes happen, when things occur, and when you could have done better. And I think it's important to kind of like take this lesson, like when you're looking, whether it's like a real world life example, a work experience, or actual games where you can look at a team and you can see what does good and what does bad, and what are those tiny things that kind of make a difference between one team and another to really make something shine, right? And I think that LR had amazing individuality because all of these pro players just keep playing the same champs, the same champs, the same champs. And then you might see like one Yone game here and there, but like even that's not a lot, right? And they had very interesting picks. They had very interesting team synergy. They had a story. They had something to drag them up. They had the luck of the draw, right? Like we saw Baus on Poppy stealing a rift with his passive. We saw like some insane ults, some very good plays. And this is just kind of how it all comes down, you know? Sometimes it's going to be very good and a success story and it blows up, and sometimes things just end up and cut a bit short. So I really enjoyed watching this series and this season and their story and how they're going and how they're progressing. Um, and sorry, and I really wanted to emphasize again for Kadril and how amazing he handled the team, how much emotions he carried for the team. You could really see him every game watching them, fanboying them in the best way possible. Also as a coach, right? Not just as a fanboy, but like Yamato as well. Like the drafting and everything was so good in my opinion. And looking back at it, when you have a lot more time to think about the draft and the enemy team considered and everything, they put a lot of time and effort into everything, and their fans did so much, and it was great to see. And the only thing really left to say is that I hope there might be some type of future, right? I mean, in many ways, we see that T1 is switching up a lot of their players, and Los Ratones is now done. So the next thing is to look for the next thing in the League of Legends scene, and maybe it's a new team, and maybe it's some new streamers. And until then, I will see you all in the next video. And that will be all.
Peace.